Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The White House now says Donald Trump will decide in 2 weeks whether the United States will join Israel's war on Iran. Of course, as many have noted, when he says 2 weeks, it often just means he's not going to make a decision either way. Of course, war with Iran would be madness. And we know that, well, we can be pretty sure about it because we all lived through the last reckless regime change war of choice in the region initiated by a Republican president. The Iraq War, of course, an unmitigated disaster, perhaps the biggest foreign policy blunder in my lifetime. Thousands of American soldiers lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians were killed. It led to the creation of ISIS. It was a disaster for America standing abroad. The region was completely destabilized for over a decade. And here we are at home, where it really hurt the Republican Party, which led directly to the nomination and subsequent election of none other than Donald Trump in 2016. Of course, we entered that war in Iraq under false pretenses. As early as the day of the September 11th attacks, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was working to somehow use the attacks as justification for an unrelated war in Iraq. The Bush administration lied about the connections between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda. They lied about Hussein having or imminently developing weapons of mass destruction.
We have no indication that Saddam Hussein has ever abandoned his nuclear weapons program. On the contrary, we have more than a decade of proof that he remains determined to acquire nuclear weapons. What I want to bring to your attention today is the potentially much more sinister nexus between Iraq and the al-Qaeda terrorist network, a nexus that combines classic terrorist organizations and modern methods of murder. Iraq today harbors a deadly terrorist network headed by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, an associate and collaborator of Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda lieutenants.
Now, that speech was based on faulty intelligence and over the objections of multiple reports from the State Department questioning that intelligence. Iraq did not have an active biological weapons program, nor did it have an active nuclear weapons program when the Bush administration used them as justification for the war. There was no credible link between Iraq and al-Qaeda. Now, Colin Powell insisted he did not knowingly lie to the UN and to the world. He later said the origins of the speech did not come from the intelligence agencies or his own State Department, but rather from Vice President Dick Cheney's office. The Bush administration wanted to exploit Secretary Powell's reputation in order to launder faulty intelligence. Well, here we are. It's 22 years later, and God, it sure looks like it's happening again. We are being told without evidence or with faulty intelligence that Iran is actively developing weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, war is not only inevitable, but necessary. But as it turns out, it's much easier this time. The Trump administration doesn't need a speech at the UN when they can just deceptively edit video of their own director of national intelligence saying that Iran is not close to obtaining a nuke to make it sound like she was saying the opposite. Here's what the White House tweeted out yesterday.
In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons.
Sounds ominous. That sounds threatening. Here's what Director Gabbard actually said in context.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program. In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons.
Okay, that's a pretty big difference, right? The critical first line. The intelligence community continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, that in fact it hasn't been authorized by the Supreme Leader. That's a pretty important context. Of course, the White House has found someone who will say Iran is days away from a nuke, regardless of the intelligence. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the same guy who came to Congress on the anniversary of 9/11 to call for war with Iraq and who's been claiming that Iran will have a nuke any day now for decades.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
No, the issue is not. First of all, are there other nations that are developing nuclear weapons? Yes.
Should we launch any other preemptive attacks?
First, let me say what they are, and then let me make a suggestion how to proceed.
Thank you.
The answer is categorically yes. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems. This is not a hypothesis. It is fact. Iraq, Iran, and Libya are racing to develop nuclear weapons. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
Of course, it wasn't a fact at all. Quite famously, deeply not a fact. Exact same playbook, right? Down to the letter. In 2002, Ken Edelman on the Pentagon's advisory board told Americans in the Washington Post, quote, "I believe demolishing Hussein's military power and liberating Iraq would be a cakewalk." Now, Fox News is sending basically the same message directly to its biggest fan, Donald Trump.
Honestly, if we ever even got into a conflict with Iran, it would be over within 2 days, if that.
Well, if the guy on Fox News says it'll be over in 2 days, well, then I'm sure it will be. It's hauntingly familiar. The only reason that Donald Trump is deliberating at all, this 2-week deadline, which, again, who knows what that means, is because there is a rift in his base with hardcore MAGA Republicans telling him, do not do this, because he promised them no new wars.
When I'm back in the White House, we will expel the warmongers, the profiteers, and take over our government, and we will restore world peace. And we're going to end these endless wars. They never stop. You ever see these wars? They go on for 14 years, 20 years. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
That's Inauguration Day, the wars we never get into. Now he's in office, and we're already at a point where a new war has started in the Middle East. That was started by Israel, right? It sure looks like we're about to go to war. And here's the thing. Every single Democrat in both houses could sign on to congressional resolutions trying to block him from bombing Iran, and he wouldn't blink an eye. But he cares about angering his base.
I don't know if they're trying to get us into a war with Iran or not, America, if Israel is trying to. I don't trust the Israel leader at all. I don't believe anything that guy says. And I don't think that our soldiers should have to go and defend stuff that they start. It feels like they're trying to push Trump to go do that. And it's like, who makes that choice? Does he make that choice? And then what do we get? What's the win for us? We're just involved in some other thing while we have suffering here at home.
Now, that individual, Theo Von, he's got millions and millions and millions of listeners. And he's been a Trump-friendly guy. And the threat of another forever war has been enough to incite the likes of MAGA-friendly podcaster Theo Von and disgraced cable news host Tucker Carlson and former Trump aide Steve Bannon. In fact, Bannon even coincidentally showed up at the White House for lunch with Donald Trump today. The other thing is that war with Iran is unpopular. Republican voters don't like it. Democratic voters don't like it. Independent voters don't like it. And yet, there's a concerted effort to, frankly, lie us into yet another conflict with BS and faulty intelligence. I mean, they keep saying, they can't have nuclear weapons. They were not on the precipice of having nuclear weapons. They just weren't. You could say they were, but they weren't. Or these straight-up deceptively edited videos. And I think this is a political opportunity for Democrats not to duck their head and see which way the wind blows, not to try to just stay silent, which a lot of them are doing, but to stand up and say no war with Iran. Absolutely not. It should be the bare minimum for our elected leaders, many of whom have already seen this scheme play out before.